introduce our guest speaker, who has, he's someone that probably many of you know or have heard of, Ira Helfand. He's the co-chair of Physicians of Social Responsibility, Nuclear Weapons Abolition Committee, and he's coming to us from Springfield, Massachusetts, where he is one of the people on the front line of the coronavirus crisis. He works in an urgent care practice, and he has been working many hours per week. So we are so grateful that amid this crisis, he's taken this time to be with us. He also serves as the co-president of the Physician for Social Responsibility's Global Federation. They call themselves IPPNW, which stands for International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. He was very involved with the ICAN's campaign for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And ICAN received the Nobel Peace Prize, as you know, in 2017. I just want to thank you again, Ira, for being here, and let me stop sharing so we can all see each other, and let Ira have the floor.
Well, thanks, Sally, and thanks to all of you for participating in this tonight. I had really been looking forward to the tour across New York State that Sally and Diane and others had planned, and thought it would be a terrific opportunity to organize people to help build this new Back from the Brink campaign into the kind of movement that we need to eliminate nuclear weapons. Sometimes our best laid plans don't work out, and this, to my mind, is a really creative and excellent attempt to get around the situation that we find ourselves in. And we're going to, this is going to be an issue going forward for the next several months, because it's going to be very hard for us to do live events. And I think this may go on for many months, this difficulty. And so we're going to have to figure out ways of continuing to do the work which we are doing, which is so important, with that restriction on our abilities. But I think it's also going to offer us a tremendous teachable moment. And it seems perhaps a bit weird to talk about that in the context, in the middle of this terrible crisis. But we need to continue working on the other issues besides dealing with the coronavirus epidemic. And we need to take advantage of the opportunities which this is affording us to help people understand the urgency of working on nuclear weapons. I think that the COVID epidemic is going to help people to see the danger they face in two ways. First of all, for many people, I think it's going to help them understand that when the experts say that the sky is going to fall if we don't do something, the sky is going to fall if we don't do something. We've been getting warned for decades that it was not a question of if, but only a question of when the next great pandemic took place. And collectively, the nations of the world and the peoples of the world did nothing to prepare for this. The horrendous failure of the Trump administration over the last few months really stands out. But even absent that, we were not prepared. We had not done the things we needed to do. We don't have the kind of public health infrastructure that we need to have to deal with everyday health problems and great crises like this. We don't have the supplies stockpiled. We don't have the plans for dealing with this kind of an event. And we are going to suffer terribly because of that. This crisis here in the United States is just getting started. It's going to be much worse over the next month or two. And we are going to pay a terrible price for having failed to listen to the infectious disease experts when they warned us that an epidemic was a matter of time. So perhaps it will be easier for people to understand the need to listen to experts when they warn about the catastrophic consequences that will follow from climate change if we don't do something about it, and the catastrophic consequences that will occur if there is a nuclear war, if we don't eliminate nuclear weapons and prevent that from happening. The other way that I think this may help us, they're related, but they're slightly different. one of the problems we face in talking about nuclear war is just the difficulty we all have imagining something that terrible. You know, especially here in the United States, we are truly blessed that there has not been a major conflict on American territory since the 1860s. We're talking like 160 years since the US Civil War. And while soldiers have gone off and experienced terrible things in other countries, they've always known they could come back to an intact, functioning society back home. And as a result of that, we as a nation, I think, have a terrible difficulty imagining the bad things that can happen to us. And certainly nuclear weapons is chief amongst those. The possibility of a nuclear war is something which is literally beyond our ability to imagine. And perhaps going through this very traumatic period that we are about to enter, or that we're in the process of going through right now, it will make it a little bit easier for people to make that leap of imagination and understand just how horrible a nuclear war will be and the fact that it can happen. And perhaps that will lead to the kind of action that we need. This is looking at the names of people who are on this call. It seems to me that many of us have been involved in this movement for some time and are quite aware of the danger of nuclear war. But I do want to spend just a few minutes reminding us of this, because it is something that is hard for us to hold in our minds. We tend to easily put it out of mind, and it's worth reminding ourselves frequently of what it is that's at stake if we are not successful in our effort to eliminate nuclear weapons. First, let me talk for just a couple of minutes about the likelihood of nuclear war. And this perhaps goes to the crux of the matter, because most people don't think that nuclear war is likely. And even those of us who know that nuclear war is going to happen if we don't do something, in our hearts don't believe it. We just can't, you look around at the world and you see, the city that you're living in or the town that you're living in, and you can't imagine it all disappearing. And somehow or other, we have to convince ourselves and other people of the truth. We have to come to understand in our hearts that nuclear war not only can happen, but it will happen if these weapons aren't eliminated. And some of you may have heard me talk about this at previous talks, but I'm always haunted by an exhibit at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which I saw many years ago. I'm not even sure it's still there. It was amongst the exhibits there, one of the least terrifying to look at initially, because it was just a passageway, a hallway. The walls on each side were covered with photographs, all taken in one little town in Poland in 1938 and 1939. They're simple snapshots, pictures of people at graduation parties, at bar mitzvahs, at sporting events. It was a Jewish town in Poland. And looking at these everyday pictures, from our perspective, we know what was going to happen to these people. 95% of them were killed in the Holocaust. And we know that at some level, they knew the danger they were in. They were aware of what was happening next door in Germany, but they couldn't believe that their entire world could be destroyed. And the thing about this exhibit that haunts me is the fear that these are pictures of us. We go about our daily lives. We know that there's a danger of nuclear war, but at the most important level, we cannot believe that our beautiful world can come to an end. And until we get to understand that, until we get to put that knowledge at the forefront of our thinking so that we act on it daily, we're not going to do the things, and I'm talking now about the nation as a whole, the global community as a whole, we're not going to do the things we need to do to eliminate nuclear weapons. So in looking at that, we need to understand that the danger of nuclear war, which has always been with us, it never went away with the end of the Cold War, has actually increased dramatically in recent years. The situation in South Asia, as many of you, I'm sure, are very aware, is incredibly unstable. India and Pakistan essentially had two Cuban Missile equivalent crises last year, where they were on the brink of nuclear war, and they stepped back at the last minute. And the second of these crises, the Indian clampdown in Kashmir, really is completely ongoing. It's unresolved, and could bubble over into a more intense conflict leading to nuclear war at any time. The situation between the United States and Russia is equally unstable at this point. We, for the first time in a generation, see both countries conducting military exercises in which they plan the use of nuclear weapons against the other side. And this was a kind of thinking that we thought had gone away with the end of the Cold War, and which we thought we would never have to deal with again. But here they are, the leaders of both sides, talking about their nuclear arsenals in threatening terms and conducting war games in which they simulate attacking and destroying their enemies and, of course, as we know, themselves. So that's the first point I think we really need to bring home to ourselves. This is not some abstract concern that we have. This is a real and present danger that we have to address. Secondly, we need to appreciate how catastrophic a nuclear war would be. We are all horrified by what is happening around the world with the COVID epidemic. The world may see as many as 2 or 3 million deaths before this is over. It is an astonishing and horrible event that we did not believe could happen. But one of the messages we need to bring to the American people and the people of the world is that this is a very small event compared to what even a limited nuclear war would be. The most recent studies about war between India and Pakistan show that given the current size of their arsenals, a war between these countries could kill up to 100 million people in a week. Not 2 or 3 million people over many months, but 100 million people in a week, directly, from the explosions, from the fires, from the radiation emanating from these bombs. But as we also know, these direct effects are only a small part of the destruction that would be caused. The most recent projections show that a war between India and Pakistan could put anywhere from 15 to 35 million tons of soot into the upper atmosphere. Now, we did studies a decade or more ago on the assumption that 5 million tons of soot would be put in the upper atmosphere. And we concluded, based on those studies, that a global famine would result that could kill up to 2 billion people around the world. We're now talking about bringing in to the atmosphere anywhere from 3 to 7 times as much soot. The food production studies have not been done yet. We don't know exactly what this is going to do to world food production, but clearly it's going to be even more catastrophic than the situation we envisioned in the studies that were released in the past decade. And so even this very limited nuclear war would cause devastation orders and orders and orders of magnitude greater than the COVID epidemic is causing. And while it would not mean the extinction of human life on this planet, it would very definitely mean the end of civilization as we know it, because no civilization in history has ever withstood a shock of this magnitude. And there is no reason to believe that the current complex interrelated economic system on which we all depend would do any better. So that's the danger that we face. Why talk about it? Well, because this isn't the future that needs to be. Epidemic diseases like COVID are things which we cannot prevent. We can prepare for them, but we can't prevent them from emerging. When we're talking about nuclear war and climate change for that matter, these are catastrophes that we can prevent. They are not acts of nature like COVID is. Nuclear weapons are little machines that we have built with our own hands in which we know how to take apart. And we have dismantled more than 50,000 of them since the height of the Cold War. We've simply failed to take the decision to eliminate the remaining 15,000. And that is the job before all of us. Now, most of you have been involved in one way or another with the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which ICAN was able to bring about. That treaty is an enormous step forward. And when it comes into force later this year or early next year, it will result in the situation where, for the first time ever, the simple possession of nuclear weapons is defined by international law as a crime against humanity. The problem, of course, with this process has been that the nuclear-armed states have not participated in it. And so the real challenge, especially for those of us living in the United States, is how do we change US nuclear policy so the United States comes into compliance with this treaty, so that it embraces the treaty and ultimately can sign and ratify the treaty. And to do that, we have built a vehicle which we think will do this, and that's the Back from the Brink campaign. It's modeled on the freeze in many ways. It's a simple prescription of what US nuclear policy ought to be as opposed to what it currently is. And it takes inspiration as well from ICANN in the way we've structured the campaign. It's not even a coalition, it's literally just a campaign. It's a group of organizations which have all agreed to endorse this common platform and work to make it US policy. The platform is relatively simple. It's not as simple as the freeze was, which had a single provision that we should stop building nuclear weapons. There are 5 planks in the back from the Brink platform. The most important is the 5th, which calls on the United States to enter today into negotiations with the other 8 nuclear-armed countries for an enforceable, verifiable, time-bound agreement to dismantle the rest of their nuclear arsenals. This is the essential step that needs to be taken, and it needs to be taken with urgency, not at some remote date in the future. The other 4 steps are things that we can do in the interim as this treaty is being negotiated to lessen the danger of a war during this transitional period. We call on the United States to abandon a policy in which it considers using nuclear weapons first, that is to adopt a no first use policy. We call on the United States to take its nuclear weapons off of hair trigger alert so they cannot be launched in 15 minutes, either because of a cyber attack or an impulsive decision by a national leader. We call on the United States to end the policy whereby the President of the United States can act alone to initiate nuclear war without any check on this authority. And we call on the United States to abandon the policy that it is the program which it is launched to spend anywhere up to $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years, enhancing every element of its nuclear arsenal. These 4 interim steps provide a way of lessening the danger, but in and of themselves, they're inadequate. It is the 5th plank, the negotiation for the elimination of these weapons altogether, that is the heart and soul of Back from the Brink. And it is the critical necessary step which the US must take. Now, again, as many of you know, at this point, over 350 organizations, cities, towns, professional associations, church groups, Rotary clubs, etc., around the country have endorsed this campaign. Legislation is pending in a number of state legislatures and before many city councils. Much of this is going to get put on hold over the next few weeks as the world becomes consumed with the need to address the COVID crisis. But it's our job to make sure that people don't forget about the even greater threat looming, the danger of nuclear war. And it's our job when the moment arrives, as the crisis around COVID subsides, to help people draw the important lessons of this crisis. That terrible things happen, that the scientific community needs to be listened to, and that we can take action. So that's the situation that we're in right now. And I think that we're going to have to figure out ways to reproduce the kind of experience we're having tonight using the internet as our means of meeting, since we can't meet face to face. And we're going to need to figure out how to keep this issue alive before the public, and then ultimately, as the COVID crisis subsides, which it will hopefully later this year, to seize that moment, that real teachable moment, and help people understand that even as we should have prepared for COVID, we need to prevent nuclear war. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Helfand. Can everybody, Diane, you can hear me? Okay. All right. So what we'd like to do is make this as much as possible a real Q&A, but we have 86 people on. So our plan is for you who have the ability to go into the chat. Now, if you don't know where that is, if you take your cursor down to the bottom, if you're on a desktop or a laptop, and you'll see chat, and that opens up a window where you can see type message here. So what we would like to do is to take a minute. I'm going to ask a question so that people have a little time to actually get their questions figured out and to type it in. Make sure you send it to everyone. In the little two, there's a little drop down and you can send personal messages, but in this case, we want you to send it to everyone. Diane is going to look at your messages and then she will actually will read them for Dr. Helfand, she or I, depending on how we can handle this. Okay, so I do want to start out with a question for you. You mentioned in your talk that because all these municipalities at the very, very local level, at the state and federal level, are all, completely consumed by the health crisis we're in right now, that a lot of the legislation is going to be put on the back burner. Is there a way that it can be connected, the work that Back from the Brink was trying to do, connected to the moment we're in? I'm thinking of the UN General Secretary calling for a global ceasefire during the coronavirus pandemic. It just seems to me that in some ways we're at a moment where, people might see this is just ridiculous, where we're planning to kill people with nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, we're trying to fight the death of possibly 1 million or 2 million, 3 million people from a virus. So that's my question to start things out.
Well, that's a great question, Sally. And I think even though we're probably not going to be able to get much legislative action or even city council action in the next few months, there's going to be a lot of room for conversation. But many people are stuck at home. They're spending more time on the internet. They're spending more time following the news than they usually do. And it's an opportunity for us to introduce a lot of different messages that relate COVID to nuclear weapons. The Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire was a brilliant idea. And many people are rallying around this, and it's encouraging to see that a number of groups just today indicated that they would cease fire in response to that call. It doesn't address the nuclear question directly, but it's a terribly important thing in and of itself. I think there are a number of messages that do tie directly to the nuclear question that we can point out. One is simply, again, and I think this is the most important one, that terrible catastrophic things that we have believed couldn't happen actually do happen. And there are experts who are trying to identify these things and warn us about them. We better pay attention to them. Secondly, we can talk about the enormous diversion of resources. There's on the ICAM website, there's a terrific graphic that shows what US nuclear expenditures in a single year would have bought us instead in hospital beds, respirators, doctors, and nurses. And so I think this is a time that is really important to draw attention to the shameful state of the public health system in the United States and healthcare in general, and to draw attention to the fact that this is because of the enormous expenditures in the military in general and nuclear weapons in particular. Sorry, there was one other that I was going to think of that I had thought of, and it slipped me as I was talking about that. I'll come back to it if I think of it.
Okay, I just want to mention to the people that are following us on live Facebook that we are monitoring the Facebook page. So if you do want to type in a question, I will try to sneak it in, with the chat questions on Zoom. So Diane, are there some questions there?
There sure are. The next one I would grab is, how can we address this in the upcoming election?
Well, I think that question was from Rudy, and Rudy, thanks for that. This election is going to be, we say this every 4 years, but this truly is going to be the most important election in modern history and possibly in US history altogether. I'm taking off my PSR hat and my IPPW hat and all the other organizational hats I wear to say what I have to say. The disastrous performance of Donald Trump during this crisis should remove any illusion that any thinking person has about his suitability to be president. And we all need to do whatever we can, which I'm sure we're all planning to do, to make sure that there's a different commander-in-chief of the United States after this election is over. I think it's going to be difficult to make the nuclear weapons issue directly an issue in the campaign. We're already relatively late in the campaign cycle, and it has not become a big issue so far. I think we need to try the best we can, and perhaps given the COVID epidemic, have more success in making this a big issue. We certainly need to be trying to reach the candidates who are reachable about the need for them to take decisive action next year when there's a new Congress and a new administration, to move quickly to implement the Back from the Brink program. We can't afford to let this be backburnered and put off, because as we know, administrations tend to get almost everything they do done in the first year and a half. And so we need to be trying to raise this wherever we can in the election process. And some of that may be just the kind of things that we do as individuals, letters to the editor, talking to our local political committees for both parties, trying to get them to address this issue with the expectation it probably won't be a big issue in the campaign, but that doesn't mean that the next administration can't be sensitized to the need to act on this during the campaign process.
Thank you. The next question I see is about the bailout this week. It gave a free ride to our defense industries, especially Boeing, which is a key nuclear corporation. Is there some way we can gather around this to clearly say we need that money to go towards COVID? Is it too late? Is it time to rally around that?
Well, I think that the bailout package that was passed has been passed, and I don't think we're probably going to want to spend a lot of time trying to repeal it, because that isn't probably going to happen. But it's certainly appropriate to point out how incredibly misplaced much of the bailout money is, and in particular, money going to defense contractors who are doing quite well, thank you, rather than to ordinary citizens who are not doing well at all. That's one of the messages that we need to be putting forward.
According to a recent radio interview, Professor Carl Grossman mentioned that the 2020 US NATO military exercise has been canceled due to the coronavirus, and Germany and Sweden withdrew. Instead, now the Pentagon decided to gear the plan to airstriking Russia with nuclear weapons. Is there any way we can get involved with this question?
I'm sorry, I must say I had not heard of that until just now. That is just so horrible. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the kind of thing, again, we're not going to stop that exercise, but it's a terrific opportunity for people to agitate, to write letters to the paper, to talk to their representatives about what an insane response that is to the current situation. I thought of what the third other message that I wanted to mention before was, which relates to that, which is the utter inability of all of our military spending to protect us from the COVID virus. The real threat, the thing that's threatening to kill tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of Americans. All of our military spending does nothing to protect us against that, because we haven't been investing in a public health system and in general health care. So, in the context of a good place to raise that message in the context of this terrible decision to war game a nuclear attack on Russia.
Yeah. Here's a question about Rotary. Can a trusted civil society organization such as Rotary or others be trained to monitor and verify disarmament in the nuclear weapons states?
I don't know if there's a role for Rotary in monitoring disarmament. I mean, historically, it hasn't been necessary. The US and the United States and Russia, previously the Soviet Union, were able to monitor their own disarmament to the satisfaction of both parties. We have a lot of experience monitoring disarmament agreements. We've dismantled these many thousands of warheads, and both sides have felt comfortable that the verification process they had in place assured them that the other side was in fact dismantling the weapons as they were supposed to. So perhaps there was a role for civil society in this as well, but I'm not sure it's necessary. This is something the governments ought to be able to do themselves. What civil society needs to do is make the governments get rid of the weapons in the first place.
This is not a question, but I want to mention to everyone on the call, if you can look at the chat, Richard Denton has posted a link to the ICANN website where it talks about healthcare costs and compares it to military spending, and I think specifically nuclear weapons. So that's a useful link for everyone.
And if you can't access the link, if you're not on the computer, if you just go to the ICANN website, www.icanw, International Campaign Abolish Nuclear Weapons.org, icanw.org, you'll be able to find that graphic very easily.
Yeah, and Richard also posted the Back from the Brink URL. It's preventnuclearwar.org, which is easy to remember. Okay, Diane. Sorry.
So this question says, you mentioned experts have been predicting it's a matter of time for climate change to generate pandemics. Could you expand on this? I never heard this correlation.
No, I'm sorry, I may have misspoken or not spoken clearly. What the experts have been telling us are several things. The infectious disease experts have been telling us that it's only a matter of time before there would be another great global pandemic like the flu outbreak in 1918. In fact, climate change may help to promote the emergence of new infectious threats, but that link wasn't specifically what I was referring to. What I was referring to was that experts are also telling us, the climate experts, that climate change is coming and it's going to be a catastrophe. And the medical community and climate scientists and the sort of experts in the international affairs community have all been telling us that nuclear war is going to happen. So it was those expert warnings that I was referring to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, questions about the election. I don't know if you have strong opinions about the candidates. I guess this question is, do you think Biden will be better than Trump, or is there a way to get another candidate?
I think Biden will clearly be better than Trump. I don't think he'll be as good as we would hope, without a lot of pressure from us. And I don't think any of the candidates on the Democratic side will be as good as we would hope, without a lot of pressure from us. Elizabeth Warren has actually articulated, I think, the best position on nuclear weapons of any of the people who are running. But we are going to have to put pressure on these people. They are consumed with the day-to-day emergencies that they're facing, and they don't often think about these longer term, but even greater threats. And it's our job to make sure that they do. But yes, if there's no question that Biden has a much better position on nuclear weapons, although unfortunately it's not anywhere near good enough yet. But again, that's our job to pressure him.
Have we considered team visits to key senators or other Washington officials? And probably at this point, it would be a question of making appointments through Zoom.
I think we should do that more than we have. There is certainly a certain amount of lobbying going on by people in the peace community and around the country. There has been right along on this and many related issues, such as lifting the Iran sanctions during this COVID epidemic. But in terms of Back from the Brink, there's only a handful of House sponsors for the Back from the Brink resolution, House Resolution 302, that was introduced by Jim McGovern and Representative Blumenauer from Portland, Oregon. So it would be very valuable for people to make appointments with their representatives to promote that legislation. And we believe that a Senate companion resolution will be introduced at some point fairly shortly. And so when that happens, we'll certainly post that on the Back from the Brink website, preventnuclearwar.org, and encourage people to start lobbying their senators as well to support that resolution.
Great. I'm going to slightly reword this question, but I think it's important. Is any of the 8 nuclear weapon states in a position where they might be influenced to sign the ban treaty? And if so, is there a way that that could be turned into pressure on at least some of the other states?
I think the feeling has been that the nuclear armed state that is most likely to break ranks is the United Kingdom. And it's not because of the wisdom of the political leadership of the United Kingdom so much as the fact that as a result of Brexit, Scotland may secede from the United Kingdom, and the nuclear base for the entire UK nuclear force is in Scotland. And the people in the military there say it would be almost impossible to recreate that naval base any place in England or Wales or Northern Ireland. And so if Scotland were to withdraw, there's a possibility that the United Kingdom would be faced with a decision of spending an enormous amount of money to build a new base or possibly getting rid of their nuclear weapons. It would also be easier for the United Kingdom to do that than for any of the others because of the very close relationship they have with the United States. They would still essentially be under the US nuclear umbrella, like Germany and Japan and Australia are, and they might feel they could make this move. And yes, if that were to happen, I think it would put real pressure on the other nuclear states to re-examine their position as well. But I don't think that's not something we can count on. It's certainly something that anti-nuclear campaigners in the United Kingdom are trying to take advantage of the situation.
Great. There's a question about whether there's a letter prepared that people could add their names to send to representatives. And maybe the question might be, should we have a depository of letters where, and is there such a thing already, where there are sample letters that people can adapt to their communities?
On the Back from the Brink website, there are many sample resolutions for use with civic organizations or with town meetings or city councils or state legislatures. I actually am embarrassed to say I don't know if there is specifically a sample letter that people can use in writing to their representative. And I will check, and if there isn't, I will make sure that we have one because that's a terrific idea.
Great. Okay. So this person is talking about correlating the link of climate change and increased potential conflict to get the message to people about the threat of nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very important message that we need to be bringing to people. One of the things that is making nuclear war more likely is the progression of climate change. And there's a tremendously inexorable quality to this problem if we don't do something about it. The US and the other nuclear weapon states always say that they want to get rid of nuclear weapons at some point in the future when the world's safer. But the problem is that climate change is making the world much more dangerous. And as people like Bill McKibben keep telling us, as climate change progresses, and it will, even if we do everything we're supposed to do over the next few years, and we're not doing that, but as climate change progresses, there will be tremendous pressure on societies all around the world, which will lead to greater conflict within communities, to greater conflict between nations. And if nuclear weapons are on the table, those weapons are going to end up getting used. This is particularly true in South Asia, where the climate crisis will terribly exacerbate the already tense situation between India and Pakistan. And it's a very important lesson for us to be sharing with people. It's a way to help the large number of people who are involved in the climate movement, but not yet involved in the anti-nuclear movement, see the need to work on nuclear weapons issues as well. And it's also, and this is a point that Bill McKibben has made on a number of occasions, it's a way of helping people understand the urgency of working on climate issues. His opinion, he's stated several times, is that even people who are really working on the climate issue often don't appreciate fully how catastrophic the climate crisis will be. And when we draw the link between climate change and nuclear war, it helps them to understand how incredibly high the stakes are if we don't deal with the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm. I'll just mention that Anne Frisch has posted some resources, and Anne, perhaps we could collect some of those, list some of those, and what could they be on the PANAS website, Sally?
Absolutely.
So please look for those. Sounds like very useful things about a number of issues related to this. What if we nuke a city? Or could we use Plan A from Princeton, and how to dismantle a nuclear bomb. So some important resources. There's a question about, despite Japan's pacifist constitution, it's accumulated the globe's 5th largest stockpile of plutonium. How can we gather global attention to this fact and stop them from reopening nuclear power plants and building new ones?
Well, you know, within Japan, there's this really stark divide between the majority of the population, which because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are vehemently opposed to nuclear weapons, and the political leadership and the military leadership in Japan, which wants Japan essentially to be able to be a nuclear power on a moment's notice. And I'm not talking about nuclear electric generation, I'm talking about nuclear weapons. Japan has an enormous stockpile of plutonium. It could be used for nuclear power plants. It also could be used to very quickly assemble a nuclear arsenal. And Japan, I think the military leadership there has very carefully maintained the option of Japan rapidly becoming a major nuclear power. And it's a terrible mistake that has been made there. There's a very large anti-nuclear peace movement within Japan, which is very aware of this issue, obviously, and it is much the focus of their work, along with trying to get the Japanese government to stop its opposition to the treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons. I'm not sure that there's much that we need to do here in the United States except being supportive of those efforts. I think most profitably, our energy should be focused on changing US policy.
Yeah. I just will mention here that some people have given a shout out to the Kings Bay Plowshares, which I think we all would want to support. And I believe that there's some discussion, at least on this list, not yet in any serious way, but of thinking, I mean, it is serious, but not carried forward at all yet, but thinking about some kind of tour involving the Kings Bay Plowshares. Sally's nodding her head.
Yeah. I replied, and I'll try to reach out to the people, and maybe we can do an online tour with the Plowshares.
Great.
Great idea. Along the lines of the nuclear nations and signing the ban treaty, what about Iran? If Iran were welcomed back into the fold, do you think they would sign the treaty?
I don't really know. I would imagine that they might, because it is their position that they don't want to have nuclear weapons. And you know, we had made some really substantial progress with Iran with the agreement that was negotiated under the Obama administration. If there's a change in administration here, and we stop this inappropriately confrontational approach to Iran with regards to its nuclear arsenal, perhaps they would sign the treaty. They did participate in the negotiations, and they participated in the conferences on the humanitarian impact of nuclear war that led to the negotiations. So I think there's reason to hope that they might. But I don't, you know, I'm not an Iran expert. I don't know that beyond, you know, sort of that kind of speculation.
Yeah. Let's see. Sally,
Did
how
you
are we
see,
doing on
I
time?
saw an interesting one from
Go ahead.
Francis. Do we know if there has been any pause on the development of new nukes anywhere, you know, as a result of this crisis?
As a result of the COVID crisis, I don't know of any pause. I mean, the crisis has only sort of engulfed us over the last 2 months. The U.S. did issue a statement at one point that despite the crisis, our arsenal remained fully operational, which I'm not sure if that was supposed to reassure people or frighten people further, but I don't know of any pause in the development of nuclear weapons as a result of this. Perhaps if the crisis continues as long as some people have predicted, that will have some impact.
A few people have made the connections with nuclear power And I'm wondering, as we work on this, on the Back from the Brink, if you feel we should be bringing that into our conversation.
I actually don't. I think nuclear power is a terrible thing, but I think it's literally orders of magnitude less important than the threat of nuclear war. And I think we need to focus like a laser on eliminating nuclear weapons. Whenever anybody asks me at a public gathering if what I think of nuclear power, I tell them. But I just don't choose personally to put my energy there, because I think we're going to blow up the planet with nuclear weapons. And we really need to focus on this above all else.
Can I just jump in here, Dr. Helfand? A lot of the work that the groups that are on this call and Peace Action have tried to do, a lot of connection of our movements. And, we've had a history of sort of, being very laser focused on an issue, whatever it is, the environmentalists focusing on their issue, the nuclear abolitionists focusing on theirs, etc. And we've done so much work to try to connect the movements. I think that we need, for Peace Action New York State, we are very involved with trying to close down Indian Point, for example, and the upstate nuclear energy power plant. So we need to find a way, maybe, we will find a way, but we need to find a way to connect all of those, because we work on multiple fronts and in coalitions, broad coalitions.
Sally, thank you for saying that, because I think you've made a terribly important point. And I certainly don't in any way discourage people from doing all the other good things that they're doing. I mean, I'm continuing to work full-time as a doctor, which is not preventing nuclear war, but I think it's worthwhile and it's important for me to do. And I think the other things that people are working on are very important. And the fact that people who are working on a variety of different issues can come together adds greatly to our strength. But having said that, I would also say that I think we do sometimes need to prioritize. And if somebody were to ask me, what should I work on? I want to do something to help the world. My answer would be very unequivocal. The greatest threat to human survival is the possibility that we'll have a nuclear war tonight. And I think we need to say that, which does not mean that we stop doing the other important things that we're doing. It means that we understand the urgency of addressing this problem above all else. And obviously, everybody on this call tonight, I think, shares that concern, or they probably wouldn't be here. So thanks for sort of course correction. I don't mean in any way to disparage the work people are doing on these other issues. I started my work on nuclear issues, working on nuclear power, and have been involved in it ever since. I just we do need to understand the enormity of the nuclear war threat.
So did you see the question, Diane, from Sylvia? I think maybe it's a good way to maybe go to action. Sylvia said, what specifically can we as individuals do to promote the Back from the Brink campaign?
So I think it's a question of looking around and seeing what networks you belong to that you can mobilize. People can individually go to the Back from the Brink website, preventnuclearwar.org, and sign up as individuals. But I think our real strength is in bringing this campaign to the communities that we belong to. So for an individual, it's a question of asking, do I belong to a faith community? Am I part of a Rotary Club? Do I belong to a professional association? Do I belong to a labor union? Do I know people on my city council? Do I know people in my state legislature? And figuring out who in your life, who in your circle of associates you can help to mobilize with you to make the statement. The goal that we had Back from the Brink was to get so many people and so many organizations and communities around the country endorsing this platform that we would essentially create a national consensus around this. And it requires a bit of creativity on each person's part, trying to think of who it is that you can help mobilize. But the easy checklist, I think, usually is community groups, faith communities, professional or labor groups that you could go to and say, look, would we as a group be willing to endorse this?
Diane, do you see another question you'd like to jump in? If not, I would like you to talk a little bit about what you're doing in Syracuse related to the Back from the Brink campaign. We had a call yesterday with a group of Syracusans who were endorsers of the campaign from faith groups and other groups. Would you like to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that our experience is moving us toward is to cluster those groups together so that groups from a particular faith community, for example, will approach other groups of their own community to endorse. Or we have an indivisible chapter that has endorsed, and if they again approach other indivisible chapters. I know that all of the communities probably that are represented here in the US have Rotary chapters who have luncheons every week. So you know, now they're not luncheons, but maybe some of them are on Zoom calls as well, or gathering in some electronic form that we could connect with. So that's one thing. And what we're thinking of it as a building up from the ground up. So we're looking for organizations within our community, and then we're bringing those together and trying to get our municipality to sign on. And we've been trying to work with our mayor and haven't gotten a lot of response. And now we're going to go, you know, to trying to get a Zoom meeting with the mayor. And I know all the politicians are totally overwhelmed. So it may still be a long time before we get that connection made, and with our common council. And then from there up to our state legislators, we've met with a couple, and then our representatives in Congress and the Senate. So it's kind of a building process that we're participating in, and it's also been really useful to network with other communities so that we can connect and say, okay, you know, one of our potential endorsers is from the United Church of Christ. They're looking at it with great interest, and we know that their national organization has signed. So those kinds of links that we can make with other endorsers and hopefully then influence our politicians.
So I'm wondering if we should give Dr. Helfand a break for a moment and catch his breath and have a glass of water. We have on the call one of the Kings Bay Plowshares who was arrested in Georgia at the naval base there and did a Plowshares action. Let's see if we can find Martha Hennessy and see if she would give us a little update, maybe just a quick explanation of what she's about the Kings Bay Plowshares action and an update on what is happening now with them. Did you find her? I'm looking for her too.
I'm just looking also.
We have 84.
I think
so
you
Martha,
can unmute yourself, Martha, if you're hearing us.
Okay, she unmuted herself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for all your great work. We are still waiting sentencing, and that has been put on hold with the pandemic that is happening now. So the federal courts are not scheduling any sentencing hearings. And, you know, I really appreciate hearing from so many different people with so many different angles on this work that is so critical. Just, you know, to try and explain for myself, you know, walking onto that military base and doing a symbolic, sacramental, non-violent direct action was just for us a way to try and bring attention to Kings Bay Naval Base on the East Coast. And I also just want to point out that there are new weapons being developed, and one was just deployed, or I don't know how many. They're called, they're warheads that are made to be able to dial up and dial down. So the Pentagon has the plans in the works while Congress was trying to debate about how to handle this new warhead being sent out. It got sent out on one of the Trident subs. So as far as our legal system, our political system, how things are being conducted right now, you know, one of the questions my husband asked me when I did this action was, why didn't you just get 500 people there at the gate and stay there at the Kings Bay Naval Gate? So we really do need to be talking more in terms of where are we placing our bodies. You know, this is extreme, and we must understand what the political process is giving us, and what the congressional process and the Pentagon process, what they have in mind has nothing to do with what we all are working on. So not that I have any solution here for saying, how do we proceed? But let's not be naive in what is being done here. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. We have a question here that might pertain a little bit to what you're talking about. Like, the question is from Dennis from Connecticut. What have been the successes outside the UN? And I think maybe he's referring to the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons that we may apply in the US. And I guess maybe I could ask Ira to reply to that. I think the Back from the Brink campaign is one of the attempts to head towards a success, but would you like to reply to that, Ira?
Yeah, I think ultimately, you know, the gold standard of this is going to be whether the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons gets signed by all of the nuclear weapon states. And that is a UN process. But much of the work in getting those states to sign on is going to take place outside of the UN itself. It's not going to be in the halls at the UN building in Manhattan where these decisions are taken. The important discussions go on there, but to get the nuclear weapon states to agree to sign this treaty, the work is really going to have to be done in the respective countries. So there's been you know, some excellent work in the United Kingdom. There's some excellent work going on in India, very significant civil society presence there, trying to change nuclear policy. Not as promising a picture yet in China or Russia. There is a significant anti-nuclear movement in Israel, not one that we know about in North Korea. I think, you know, in many ways, I think the United States is going to have to provide leadership on this issue. And so there's a particular responsibility on us. Back in the 80s, it wasn't the US, it was the Soviet Union that really led the way. And Gorbachev, you know, to his everlasting credit, had the vision and the courage and the perseverance to challenge the United States to join him in ending the Cold War arms race. I don't at this moment see a Gorbachev-like figure in Russia or in China, certainly not in the current administration here in the United States. But I think we have the most open system and the greatest possibility of creating a Gorbachev here. And we need to take that responsibility very seriously, because it's going to be the work done in our countries that really enables the United Nations process to come to a successful fruition.
I'll just mention someone asked for the website for Back from the Brink, and Sally has posted it on the chat, but if you're not able to see the chat, it's preventnuclearwar.org.
So it looks like we have come to the end of most of the questions, or are there some others that we might have skipped over? Because it's sometimes a little hard to see everything. If you feel like a question wasn't answered, feel free to post it again. And I think for our last few minutes, maybe we could try to do a go around of next steps for the Back from the Brink campaign that you on the call may be thinking about taking, or you are actually doing. So if you, what we'll do is we're going to put everybody up. I know that your hands, some of you are not visible, but if you could raise your hand if you have something to say about what you are working on in your area, we will unmute you, and hopefully we'll see you. The people that are, if there's anybody who would like to say anything, we'd like to hear from you.
I have something to say. Frank Baldwin from Ithaca.
All right.
I'd like to say that over the past couple of years, I've been corresponding with a lot of candidates for Congress and for the Senate. When they ask me for money, I ask them if they have know about the Council for a Livable World, and if they say no, I tell them about it, and a lot of them connect with the Council for a Livable World and tell them how they feel about nuclear weapons, and they get sponsored by the Council for a Livable World. And I also send them a contribution. And I've got about 20 candidates now for state government, but mostly for federal government, Congress and the Senate, who I correspond with, and I send them the latest information about Back from the Brink and what you can do to prevent a nuclear war. And that goes with a small contribution. And I've got a lot of people that are happy that they found out about the Council for a Livable World because it's helping them get elected. And that worked out in the last election in 2018. A lot of the people that I sponsored got elected. But of course, I connected with mostly the progressive ones, but I suggest that when you get a request for a contribution, give them a nudge toward Back from the Brink.
That's a great idea, Frank.
That's terrific.
Do we have anybody else who with
I
their
see
hand raised?
Rachel Clark's hand is up.
Okay.
I've unmuted you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Hi, my name is Rachel Clark. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace New York chapter, and also a member of a group called Manhattan Project for a Nuclear-Free World.
Mhm.
Every year we organize several events, and one of them is August 5th event. August 5th is August 6th in Japan, where when the atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima 75 years ago. We started this event 5-6 years ago. What we've been doing is together with Veterans for Peace New York chapter, we bring apology letter of dropping atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and a bunch of bouquet of flowers. Anyway, so in this open letter, we always include some kind of nudging nuclear issues in Japan. For example, what about the situation of refugees from Fukushima? How they are trying to close off the crippled Fukushima Daiichi, and how they are thinking of the terminating U.S.-Japan nuclear agreement and things like that. So every year we are doing it, and this year again, I don't know about, because of this coronavirus situation, if we could organize outdoor event that we used to do, but we will do something. And I would like to have more and more participation by many organizations endorsing our open letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you,
Um,
Sally.
I see Francis Yasmin. I haven't found the name on the list
Yeah,
yet.
I'm going to unmute
Great.
you,
Very
Francis.
good.
Oh, well, we're
Okay.
going back and forth. Okay,
Yeah.
go.
All right, cool. So first off, just thanks all for putting this together. Second, one thing I wanted to point out that I've realized through my campaign was how powerful Twitter can be. And especially at this moment when folks are stuck at home, I want to encourage everyone to realize that with a little bit of time and energy put into Twitter, each one of us has the power to participate in national and international conversations at a really interesting way. There's a lot of different tips and tricks for building sort of a following and tagging the right people. But I've realized how important it is and how each of us, just even by retweeting candidates and organizations, can really help spread the message. I imagine if you Google, there's probably some Twitter tutorials. One of the things that I'm going to be working on over the next several months is developing my own Twitter tutorial that I'll then invite and try to put out there and do for organizations to help supporters learn how to most effectively use what is a really powerful platform. So.
What a great idea. I mean, even for a rough little short training, we'd be open to that, to try to make it available to our Peace Action friends and supporters here, like the people on the call. So maybe we can talk about that later. Is there anybody else with their hand up?
I see Vicky Ross's hand up, and I just was trying to unmute you. Can you unmute?
I think,
There you
I think I'm unmuted.
got it.
So,
Yeah.
I just want to say, well, first of all, thank you for having this, and the fact that we have 86 or some odd people on the call, it shows the interest and the ability to organize even now, when our civil liberties have really been taken away temporarily. For some reasons, but certainly it's something to notice. But anyway, we have been in touch with our congressperson's office, that's Higgins, and it's just kind of a mixed bag with him. So we'll pursue this, and we do have a good relationship. I think he's certainly improved a lot over the years, not enough, but so both working in a focused way, but also I do think it's important to unite the struggles and just unite the issues and the visions to something that's about nonviolence and caring for people on the planet, which if that dictates our actions and our choices, that's going to make the big difference. So I think even while we work in a focused way, we also need to be absolutely coalition building, movement building, really uniting the struggles and really showing, a way. It's about a nonviolent way of doing things.
That's great. Did anybody else want to say something?
I see Mr. Chand.
Yes.
Go ahead.
This question may sound a bit silly, but then I heard from some of my known people that the POTUS Trump carries through his assistant a remote control sort of a box wherever he travels, and if it necessitates, he can trigger it so that the nuclear weapons can just take off through that. Is that, I got this thing heard through somebody, so I'm curious to know whether it's true.
Maybe Ira, you want to address that?
Yeah, both the president of the United States and the president of Russia have a suitcase, a football, it's called in Russia, that travels with them at all times so that they can launch a nuclear war no matter what they're doing. It's an extraordinary situation, but in the case of the United States, if you look at pictures of the president, if it's a wide angle picture, there will always be somebody about 10 feet away from him in military uniform who's carrying the briefcase, the suitcase that enables him, the president, to launch a nuclear war.
Okay.
I
Now
think he
you
sleeps
know.
outside the president's bedroom at night.
Yeah. All those movies are true that you see. Anyone else?
I see Peter Metz has his hand up.
And also Anne, when you get a chance.
And okay. Peter, you want to go first, and then Anne and Ed.
Yeah, I'm here in the Boston area. I'm with Massachusetts Peace Action. I want to thank Peace Action of New York State for doing this. I think it's just great. And I can't figure out how to send you a chat thing. I've typed it up, but I can't find the end button. Anyway, here's what I wanted to say. Wouldn't it be wise to concede really that we're not going to get public attention to this issue now during the COVID crisis, and instead use our time to quietly mount some sort of very dramatic effort that we could spring on the world when the COVID crisis has subsided. And I'm thinking in particular that you can make the point that we have ignored the pleas of scientists to get ready for the next pandemic. I mean, I don't know the details, but I think there have been at least 2 official reports saying it's going to happen, get ready for it, which have been ignored. And of course, we've been ignoring for years the scientists' pleas to please end the nuclear arms race.
True. I saw Anne hand up.
Ed, and then Pierre after them.
So you should be.
Where did they go?
They're here. I can.
You unmute them?
Could you want to try to see if you can say something and see? It looks a little weird that you're muted, but see if you can say something. No. Okay. Let's try.
Wait a second. I think. Oops. There. Okay.
Okay. This is Ann and Ed. We're from Syracuse, and we're both active in a group called Upstate Drone Action, which for the past 10 years has been trying to draw attention to the issue of killer drones. We have a military base on the edge of Syracuse called Hancock Air Base, which is the home of the 174th Attack Wing of the New York National Guard. And it pilots Reaper drone robots over much of the oil lands, the Islamic oil lands, killing hundreds and hundreds of civilians. Now, I bring that up in this context because a couple of months ago, a Reaper drone was instrumental in assassinating one of Iran's generals, Suleiman. At the time, people understood that this could be a spark leading to nuclear war. So I want to draw the attention of this group to the fact that we have killer drones operating throughout the oil lands in the Middle East in particular, in Western Asia, assassinating hundreds of people. And this could very easily be a spark leading to nuclear war.
Yeah, very good point. I don't know, Ira, do you want to comment on that?
No, I think it's a very good point. You know, some fool thing in the Balkans will start the next war was the famous quote before World War I. Some fool thing someplace is going to be the spark that starts, you know, the nuclear war if it comes to that. And this extremely provocative activity that the United States military engages in so frequently is quite apt to be that fool thing.
So one thing I wanted to just ask you, if you thought, like, just like the global ceasefire is a campaign that's going around and getting supported, if that's successful, can we build on that to try to get some successes like a global pause in nuclear weapons development, just like the nuclear freeze, sort of because of the use the COVID crisis, but then, you know, because that's really a chance to rethink our priorities.
Well, that's a great idea. And you know, I also want to thank Rachel for bringing up the Hiroshima and Nagasaki anniversaries that are coming up, because it's not clear what level of activity we'll be able to engage in by August. But even if it's all virtual activity, that's going to be a time with a lot of focus. And perhaps, Sally, the idea that you just had is something that we could really try to focus in on at that point, that nations should sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and the nuclear weapon states, if they're not ready to sign yet, should have a global pause along the lines of the global ceasefire that the Secretary General has proposed. That could be a terrific thing to organize people around.
So we'll note that and all these other ideas. I think I saw John.
I had told Pierre he would be next if possible. He had a point about divestment.
And then John after that.
Great.
Hi, this is Pierre. Just a very simple point that, you know, if you're not familiar with the investment portfolio of the organization that you belong to, just check and see if there's an opportunity to spark a conversation there about divesting from nuclear weapons.
I would just add that ICANN has a Don't Bank on the Bomb campaign that would get money out of nuclear weapons. So I would advise people to look at that. And that involves many, many corporations and banks that you would be familiar with and may have money in.
I'm trying to raise my hand. I unmuted myself. I don't know if people can hear me. Sandra Yarney.
Sandy, we're going to have John go and then you'll go.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
You need to unmute yourself.
Ma'am, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it.
All
Start
right.
again, John. Just got you
Okay.
unmuted.
All right. Once again, my name's John Raby. I'm with the Nuclear Weapons Working Group of New Hampshire, which is affiliated with New Hampshire Peace Action and New Hampshire American Friends Service Committee. Turns out that Sandra is my sister in that group. Anyway, I think implicit in this entire conversation is that we are now reaping the consequences of 70 years care and feeding of the military industrial complex. So we're at a point where the chickens have come home to roost. And so what I've been trying to do personally, I write a series of bi-weekly columns for our local newspaper in the small New Hampshire town where I live. And what I'm trying to stress is the connections, because I think these are mutually reinforcing dangers among climate change, nuclear arms race, and militarism, and pandemics revolving around a wholesale failure to meet human needs. Because I think each of these dangers reinforces the other two. And the more we can hammer on that point, the better. And I think that meets some of our worries about intersectionality without spreading ourselves too thin. That's the first point. Second thing, you never know what's going to turn up. And this is a piece of good news, largely through our connections with Global Zero and with another colleague of mine, Arnie Alpert. I was able to get in touch with a reporter from Shimbun Akahata in Tokyo named Susuma Ikeda. He's a great guy. So if you could look him up and connect with him, all so much the better. That's another point I would like to make. Regarding Council for Livable World, it has its place, but a word of caution, please, particularly because Ira made a good point about how Democrats might be better than the Republican candidates, they'll need to be pressed. Recently, the council endorsed one of our congresspeople from New Hampshire, a guy named Chris Pappas. Fair enough, but Pappas recently voted in favor of an $11.7 million appropriation for the F-35. So these things have to be handled with a certain degree of caution. That would be a warning. And at this point, I'll yield to Sandra. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, John. Sandra?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that I think is so important is to get people that are not aware of this topic on board. And I think that we have to go at it from different ways. I mean, the way Ira approaches it with all the information and all the dire predictions of what could happen is really important. But I was thinking about the fact that we need to get people engaged kind of emotionally in a different way. And someone has written a play that we're considering. It's called Miss Atomic Power. And it's about a beauty queen in Nevada. It's comic, but it has all the elements of the incredible tragedy and the decisions that scientists were making when they were developing the bomb. And so these kind of events around the 75th anniversary, where you can combine something that's a cultural event and that people can get an more indirect message about what we're doing to ourselves and what we've done so far, and then having an event where you're at the end of it, where you're having a panel discussion and bringing people up to, well, this is how this relates to the military budget and all the things that we're not getting for human needs. So anyway, it's that kind of broader way of bringing people in who are maybe just going out for a fun evening and go, oh, wow, there's something here I need to be thinking about.
I am just checking the time. I think that's a great, I wrote down the name of the play. Maybe you can put your email in the chat if you can, and we can reach out and get more information to share about Miss Atomic Power. So we're very close to.
Sally, if I could just say one thing exactly about that, the chat. As I understand it, the chat just goes away when we close the meeting. But yesterday, someone was able to capture all the information in the chat.
I have.
You have. Okay. All set.
Anybody else can do it also. You just select it all and then put it someplace in a Word document or someplace.
And get it to select.
There are 3 dots next to the To Everyone button on the right. And if you click on that, you can get a little link that says Save Chat. It goes right onto your computer. Okay.
Oh, awesome. We learned something. Thank you so much. Thanks, Anne. All right. So we're going to close out. I want to thank everybody who's been involved. And I'd like, Ira, would you leave us with some parting words of maybe a little hope? I don't know.
Yeah,
Dan?
Thanks. And Sandra, thanks. I know I'm very depressing sometimes, and it's good to be reminded of that.
But you know I love you. What you're doing.
You know, I'm not a pessimistic person. I talk the doom and gloom stuff because I think people need to hear it, but I think that we can win this struggle. I wouldn't keep doing this if I didn't. And when I'm part of a group gathering like this with all of you wonderful people who are all working so hard with so much energy and so much creativity in doing this, it reaffirms that hope. Look, we can't be sure we're going to win this. We may lose, but I think we have every reason to hope. There's nothing about nuclear weapons, about nuclear war that's inevitable. We have once before in the 80s scored an astonishing success in ending the Cold War arms race. It was something which nobody thought we would be able to do. And many of us on this call were part of that. We did it. All we're telling ourselves is that we need to do again what we've already done once before. And the stakes are incredibly high, but so is our determination to make sure that our grandchildren and our children have a planet to live on. And I think if we all do that part of the job, which is ours to do, we're going to be successful. I really want to thank Sally and Diane for putting this event together tonight. It's a real inspiring example of the fact that we can continue to meet and organize even as we are appropriately locked down in our own homes. And over the next few months, we're going to have to do a lot of this, and then we're going to emerge at some point back into real direct face-to-face contact. And we've got some terrific ideas on this call tonight, some terrific messages that we can use to help people understand the need to bring this about. And I think the Back from the Brink campaign has a very bright future. So thanks so much for organizing this, and thanks to everybody for being part of it.
Thank you, Ira.
Yes.
Thank you.
Diane. Thanks, everyone. I am going to end only 2 minutes